Hello and welcome back to the inaugural Edacity Industry Leadership Discourse. For those who might have missed the first session we might had just now, we are in the second session of the day with the topic of high performance leadership. Our speaker today is someone special and very close to my heart as he teaches my former alma mater back in the UK. He is none other than Professor David Pendleton, a professor in leadership at Henley Business School, where he works as extensively in executive education. David completed a doctorate in psychology at Oxford University and devoted the first half of his career to research and teaching in doctor-patient communication. David is also a business psychologist, educator, consultant, and author. He has published extensively on medical communication in healthcare and on organizational leadership. His most recent book, authored with Professor Adrian Fernham of UCL and John Cowell of Sid Business School, University of Oxford, titled Leadership, No More Heroes, and is in its third edition, published by Palgrave Macmillan, London in 2020. He's currently writing a new book for leaders, which is a novel approach to work-life balance and suggests a means for evaluating the impact of work to maximize its benefit. David is a member of the trustee board of the Royal College of General Practitioners and is an associate fellow of the Sid Business School at Oxford University and Green Templeton College, Oxford. Our moderator for this session during the Q&A will be Mr. Wan Ahmad Saifuddin Wan Ahmad Razi, Managing Director of Edacity Iskandar Malaysia, Sdn Bhd, with over 20 years of working experience in various senior management positions in education, e-business, and consultation. So without further ado, I would like to pass the floor to our speaker, Professor David Pendleton. The floor is yours, sir. Welcome on board.
Well, thank you very much. Let's just do a simple question. Can you hear me well?
We can, clearly.
Perfect.
Loud and clear.
Excellent. It's lovely to have such a warm welcome. Thank you very much for it. I have to say that I must update my CV because where it says I'm busy writing a new book, which is a new look at work-life balance, I need to update that CV, don't I? Because it's here. It's already out. So, but nonetheless, I'm delighted to be with you. My great regret is that I can't be with you physically because I love Malaysia. I've had many a lovely holiday there, even done a little work there in KL. I must say that I absolutely feel at home in Asia, having lived there for a couple of years with my family, and my family love Asia too. So my great regret is that I can't physically be with you today. I'd love to be there with your lovely smiles, your warmth, your food, the weather. I would just love physically to be with you, but I can't be, so there we are. So I've only got an hour with you, although we can extend it a little if people have got lots of questions they want to ask, and I'm very happy to do so. But I'm going to talk a little bit to you today about an approach to leadership, which I have been writing about and teaching now for a while. And I want to put it under the heading of high performance leadership, because what I'm trying to do is to correct a number of, I think, misconceptions about what leadership is and how it works. In fact, what I've tried to do is not so much say how people should lead, but try to identify in my work what leaders actually have to do. And that is not at first sight obvious. There are all sorts of ideas about leadership out there, but the problem is that they don't all say the same things. They don't even all say compatible things. And so what I'd like to do is to see if we can all get onto the same page when it comes to leadership. Now, I'm going to share my screen with you, and that's the one thing we've not been able to rehearse in the run-up to this. So let me just ask if I share my screen here. Can I just simply ask Nabila, can you see that?
Yeah.
Can you see that?
Yes, perfect. We can see.
Oh, great. Welcome to High Performance Leadership. Great. Okay, so it's what I'm going to do this morning is I'm going to set out some ideas. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I got to the conclusions that I want to share with you today. But of course, I can't do an extensive review of the literature, which is what I did when I came into the field of leadership about 20 years ago. Because anyway, I don't think that's what you want to hear today. What you want to hear is my conclusions. And so I'm going to just give a flavor of that before going on to my own approach to leadership, which I call the primary colors approach to leadership, for reasons that will become obvious. The other thing, just to say briefly, is that the chat function on here, I know, is really important, and I would encourage you to write your thoughts or questions onto them, but I won't be monitoring it while I'm talking to you. Someone else will monitor that and will feed your thoughts through to me at the appropriate time. I hope that's okay, but like an awful lot of people, I can't multitask, so I'm going to focus on trying to be coherent and straightforward about my presentation with you all, and then urge you to put things into the chat if you want to, and they will be picked up. And so without further ado, I'm going to move on. So I'm going to talk to you about what I want to call the primary colors approach to leadership. But I'll start with a simple definition. For me, leadership is about creating the right conditions. It's about creating the conditions for people and organizations to succeed and achieve significant goals. But the point is, it's not about taking on all the most difficult tasks yourself. It's about getting the conditions right for everyone else to succeed. So it's very, very hard to make the case that I have succeeded as a leader unless all of my people or my organization has succeeded as well. Because the purpose of the leadership is to enable others and to enable the organization. So I've got within that thought 4 propositions to share with you, which I'm not going to start with, but I will get to very quickly. When I came into the field of leadership, it was about the turn of the millennium. It was the beginning of the 21st century. And I did what typically academics and researchers, in fact, anyone interested in any subject tends to do. They try to figure out, firstly, where has this field of understanding, where's it been? What's happened so far? What is, if you like, the story so far? So I looked back at the research and the practice of leadership throughout the 20th century. And what I discovered was that there is no orthodoxy about leadership. What I found was a field, in a sense, in a mess. There were all sorts of ideas floating around. Not many of them attempted to understand leadership as a whole. Most of them had a view on a particular piece of leadership, like situational leadership, for example, or servant leadership. They had a particular perspective. They were looking at a particular piece of leadership, but no one was trying to describe the field as a whole. Well, I'm going to try to do that for you. But I did notice that, secondly, there were an awful lot of fads and fashions throughout the 20th century with respect to leadership. And that is that ideas would come and they would go. Management by walking about was a kind of management or leadership theory. It had a heyday and it disappeared. Total quality management has kind of come, established itself, and now no one talks about it anymore. Instead, people focus on some of the things that it raised into their attention, into their consciousness, but it's not a sort of dominant idea anymore out there. But what I would say is there is only one megatrend, one overall finding that I found throughout the 20th century, which is important for us to understand, and I'm going to share that with you now. It's what I call the democratization of leadership. Now, what do I mean by that? It's very easy for us to imagine that leadership is largely about what people at the top of organizations do, in a sense, to others. I'm at the top and I push my leadership, as it were, down through the organization. Well, that's what it was like at the start of the 20th century, for sure. In fact, if you think of the 20th century, there was a shift that took place between I decide, that's the boss decides, through to everyone else gets some sort of participation in the decision making. And you can probably divide the 20th century into 3 equal parts. The first part was all about hierarchy and authority. There were all sorts of ideas around at the time, some under the heading scientific management, but it was largely about what people in authority, that is at the top end of organizations, did to others and asked them to do for them. And when it got a little softer, it was to do with the kind of responsibilities of leaders to their people. And I know that in Asia, the idea of the iron rice bowl has been around for a while. And that is that, you know, I as a boss look after you and you give me all of your loyalty. Well, that's a kind of old-fashioned idea now, and it's one which is probably best thought of as a part of our history rather than a part of our future. Now, around the middle of the 20th century, the idea of vision arose. Now, why did that arise then? Well, remember the first part of the 20th century had largely been about how bosses can push people towards the goals and tasks that they want them to achieve. So in a sense, think of the beginning of the 20th century as push leadership. Vision is about pull leadership. It's about saying, you know what, there's a better place for us over there. Let's see if we can move over there together. So for example, after the Second World War, Sony gave themselves a vision of transforming forever the world's perception of Japanese goods being of poor quality. And of course, Japan has largely achieved that. We don't think of Japan as poor quality, we think of it as high quality. And Walmart in the US, the supermarket group, said that their vision was to make it possible for poorer folk to be able to buy what richer folk could buy. And so their whole purpose in Walmart was to make goods inexpensive, to bring the prices down. And they went to extreme lengths to do so. It was at the time that Walt Disney Corporation gave themselves the vision of, they said, our task is to make people happy. Well, that might have been a bit grand, maybe even grandiose as an idea, but that's what they set out to try to do. Towards the tail end of the 20th century, therefore, we were fully into this swing of participative leadership. And so the late 20th century is characterized by partnership and co-leadership, that is leading together. And so we are in the 21st century now, but what I think the first thing we have to guard against is using ideas for our leadership now and into the future, which are really the product of the 19th or 20th centuries, when the world was a very, very different place, almost to some extent unrecognizably different. You think about talking to your own children about what it was like when you were children, and even though that's not that long ago, they will find it hard to believe the things that you say. I wrote something recently, and I found myself reflecting on the changes that have happened in my lifetime. You know, and before I was born, there was no spacecraft, except in science fiction. There was no internet. There was computers were very, very, very few and far between and filled massive rooms. The idea that I could see and talk to someone on something as simple as my iPhone was just science fiction when I was a child. And I was reflecting the other day as I drove by a petrol station, a gas station, that at the time when I was a boy, I could fill my car, albeit with a smaller gas tank, for the same price as it now costs me to buy 1 liter of fuel. My lifetime. So there's no point our trying to borrow ideas from much earlier for our leadership. We need to think about ideas about leadership that have their origins in and for the 21st century. So I'll share some of that with you now. In fact, the conclusions I came to as I set out on my journey was what we needed was leadership that was based on sound evidence. Now, that's not just because I'm a professor. I wasn't at the time. I was a consultant and I had to be eminently practical. But evidence seemed to me to be important. Otherwise, what have we got? Just opinion or anecdote. And that doesn't seem to do very well. The second thing I wanted it to be was an approach to leadership that was reflective of the 21st century's society and needs. But more than anything, I also wanted it to be coherent, simple, and memorable. Not because all of you are not bright, super smart people, because you are, but rather because you're all busy, and the extent to which people are busy gets worse and worse year on year. So if our approach to leadership isn't coherent, that is, pieces all fit together, simple and memorable, then the chances are you won't use it, because you'll be frustrated by the need constantly to be looking up the things that you know is somewhere in the back of your mind, but a bit like the periodic table in chemistry, you feel you've got to go to a textbook and pick it out and start to flick through and find the relevant bits. Well, I want you to be able to hold in your mind the approach to leadership that I'm going to share with you today. And you'll be a better judge than me about whether I've achieved this, but I'm glad to say that many other audience I've spoken to think this approach to be coherent, simple, and memorable. But I can assure you that it is based on the evidence that I've seen so far. So one of the things you could do as a little mental exercise on your own just now is to think of examples of leaders you have known who have made a difference to the performance of their teams or organization. And think also about how they did it. I'm going to give you just a second or two before I go on to my next slide, maybe to make a note about that. Examples of leaders you've known who've made a difference to the performance of their teams or organization, and how did they do it? Because in a sense, as you write these examples down, they become a test for the ideas I'm going to share with you. Somewhere in what I'm about to say, you should find the things that you're writing now. And if you don't, then that's the great source of a great question to ask me later. Why can't I find this particular impact of leaders on organizations in the things you've been saying, Professor Pendleton? Okay. So assuming you've made those notes or you're making them now, I'll go on to what I want to tell you about. So here's my first proposition of 4. So my belief is that this model, which is called the primary colors model of leadership, which is the first proposition in the primary colors approach to leadership, I believe that this describes the territory of leadership. And that is, if you want a comprehensive view of what leaders have to do, I'm going to suggest to you that it's in this Venn diagram, these 3 circles and the domains, the 3 domains and the 7 tasks that are contained within it. I'll talk you through it. I believe that leadership comprises 3 domains: the strategic domain, the operational domain, and the interpersonal domain. And incidentally, if you're interested in all this, you can always go and look it up in the book that RMC described earlier. I don't do this in order to sell books. By all means, get it out of the library. What I want to do is just to reassure you that you can go and follow all this up later if you want to do so. So the strategic domain is all about tomorrow. It's not about today. It's about the direction we're trying to get in, to move in. It's about the things we want to bring about, not the things we have already brought about or are in the process of bringing about. So the strategic domain, being all about tomorrow, has very few facts in it. Very few facts because we haven't got to tomorrow yet. We don't know what the exchange rate's going to be. We don't even know with any great certainty what the weather's going to be like. We certainly don't know that for next week or next year. And the strategic domain covers our medium-term future. It can even be extended to our long-term future, but I'll say a few more words about that later. But think of the strategic domain as all about tomorrow. It's where the world of possibilities exists, limited only by our imagination. But there are very few facts in the strategic domain. So what's the implication of that? Well, it means that those of you interested in this idea called VUCA, which stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, It was a term coined by the US military in the 1980s to describe why it's hard to plan for the next conflict. And that's because they believed they lived in a world that was increasingly volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. The strategic domain, being all about the future, suggests that most of the uncertainty lives in the strategic domain. And it's very different, therefore, from the operational domain, which is all about today. It's about how we get today's work done. The operational domain is not so much full of uncertainty, but it's full of the complexity in that idea called VUCA. Complexity because the operational domain comprises a whole range of facts: Gantt charts, targets, budgets, deliverables, objectives. All of these things sit in the operational domain. Any attempts to increase the efficiency of our organization are all in that operational domain. Can we find a better way to work? Yes, let's do it as fast as we can. All of that is in the operational domain. And then in the interpersonal domain, thinking of VUCA again, most of the ambiguity sits there because that's about the people in our world. And leadership is as much, in fact, maybe even principally, about the impact we have on people, and through them, the impact we have on the operation and the journey that we want to go on that we call strategy. So I want to suggest, firstly, that leadership is hard because it has to operate in these three domains simultaneously. Now, in that Venn diagram, in those three circles, you've got 7 tasks. The pure case in the strategic domain I've called setting strategic direction. And setting strategic direction is not the same as creating a strategy. It's something slightly vaguer than that. It's something that comes before we get to a strategy. It starts by horizon scanning. It starts by looking around our organization, even looking around our marketplace. We set strategic direction only when we understand the market that we're trying to operate in, but we begin to see the things that are emerging from it. The setting strategic direction is about horizon scanning. It's about creating a story that makes the most sense of what we see happening in the world around us that has relevance for our organization. And it's not always very specific at the start. I'll tell you a real story. All of you will know the airline Cathay Pacific Airways. That was run a number of years ago by a delightful man called Tony Tyler, a good friend of mine. And Tony became chief executive of Cathay Pacific Airways. And after that, he became director general of IATA, the International Air Transport Association, which is a worldwide organization, but based in Geneva. And when he arrived, he spent a little time trying to understand even better than he did already as an airline chief executive, the work of IATA. And when he'd begun to look around, look at the airline world, think a bit how the world was changing, look at how airlines as a whole were responding to the changes happening in the world around him, he called his top 300 people together from all over the world. The top 300 were the leaders and managers in each of his key offices. And he said this to them. He said, my tenure of 5 years is about to start. And I want to set our direction for those 5 years. He said, in a nutshell, this is what I believe. The world's airlines are safe and secure, otherwise people wouldn't fly, but they're not sustainable. That is, they don't make a great impact on the environment, but certainly they're not financially sustainable either, because they can flip from profit to loss almost unpredictably and from one year to the next. Now, MAS and SQ are among the more stable airlines, but IATA, remember, represents 80 of the world's leading airlines, and he knew that they were collectively at great risk of financial instability. In fact, he pointed to the fact that in the first year of the first Gulf War, the world's airlines together lost more money than had ever been made to that point in the history of aviation. That's quite a statistic, isn't it? They had lost in 1 year more money than had been made to that point in the history of aviation. So he said, our mission, our purpose, our vision, if you will, for IATA is to become a source of innovation and change in the airline industry towards greater sustainability. And industry veterans said to him, Tony, that's a really helpful, crisp, simple formulation of what we've got to try to do together. But how are we going to do it? And Tony gave them the best possible answer. He said, you know what? I don't know. But that's the question we've all got to answer together. And he said that for two reasons. One, he didn't know, but also secondly, he realized that if ever we're going to create alignment, in other words, if we're going to get people aligned around this strategy, then they've got to get involved in the planning and organizing of it. And you can see, therefore, in the strategic domain, the setting the direction, the involvement of people in the planning and organizing, which tends to create alignment because it's now our plan, not my plan. So if this doesn't work, don't blame me. Together, we've got to take accountability for the success of our organization. And the pure case in the operational domain is delivering results. And I'm a realist. I ran a consulting business for 30 years. And I know that absolutely every day without fail, we have to deliver results, whether we are a university, whether we're an orchestra, whether we are a sports team, whether we are manufacturing industry, whether we're a hospital. It doesn't matter what we are, we've always got to deliver results every day. Deliver, deliver, deliver. And so in that case, of course, we've got to translate the strategic direction that we're setting into the plans that allow us to come up with the daily objectives that allow us to deliver results. So that's working our way down the left-hand side of this model. But also, if we're really smart, we'll be able to get teams working effectively together so that a team of 3 or 4 might be able to create the efficiency of a team of 5 or 6 if they can work what's called synergistically, so that each piece adds to the other pieces. So it's an additive model. Effective team working not only increases the efficiency of working, but it also increases the creativity in our work as well. There's good evidence about all of that. And of course, the pure case in the interpersonal domain is keeping the relationships strong. What we want is people to love what they do. I think it was Tony Bennett, the singer, who said, you know what, if you do something you love, then you never do a day's work in your life. Of course, what he means is, if you do what you love, then it doesn't feel like work. And I'm privileged to say that I've had a career in which I have loved my work, and it's not felt like work a lot of the time, because it's always brought a smile to my face, because you know what? Sometimes I get to talk to delightful people in Malaysia and elsewhere. In fact, I'm thinking in the last 4 weeks, I've spoken to people in Finland, I've spoken to people in Sweden, I've now spoken to people in Malaysia and other parts of the world. I was thinking what a joy that is. Without leaving my chair, I can be in many places simultaneously, which was not possible, again, when I was a child. So there, I'm suggesting, is the territory of leadership. I'm suggesting that it comprises these 3 domains. Most of the uncertainty sits in the strategic domain, most of the complexity in the operational domain, most of the ambiguity in the interpersonal domain. Because as you know as well as I do, people are not always easy and straightforward to interpret or understand. Now, if you want a simple way of remembering that, think of leadership of head, hands, and heart. The strategic domain is trying to figure out which way to go. The operational domain is the action domain and getting things done. And the interpersonal domain is the feeling or emotional domain in which we keep people motivated, appreciated, recognized, and feeling good about themselves and each other and what we do as an organization. And let me just tell you that interpersonal domain really, really matters. The more I've read about it, the more I've realized that actually linking those 3 circles is the best way to do it. Because here's a study that came from looking at 77 top management teams in Israel. And they were looking for the teams that had a greater capacity to adapt to changes in the external environment. In other words, this is that ability to create what was called strategic adaptability. And what they traced it back to was the interpersonal domain, which here I put on the left-hand side of the diagram. In other words, when teams showed a genuine interest in and concern for each other's needs, well, then team members were more likely to innovate, more likely to learn, and more likely to seek opportunities to do both innovation and learning. And as a result of that, and also because they had got this interest in and concern for each other's needs, the team showed, those teams showed a greater capacity to adapt to changes in the external environment. In other words, when you get it right with your team members, you can create psychological safety. If you've got each other's backs, if you're looking after each other, you create a safe environment for people to experiment and innovate and learn, because let's face it, experimentation and learning is not 100% successful every time. You've got to have a certain tolerance of failure if you're going to innovate and experiment. And so you need people to look after each other, to encourage each other, to make it safe, not to criticize when something doesn't quite work. If it's done for the right reasons, we have to encourage people to try again and try again. And eventually we'll get this right. Do you know that James Dyson, who's now got his headquarters in Singapore, the guy who invented the cyclone vacuum cleaner, here's a remarkable number. He tried to create that cyclone vacuum cleaner, get this, 5,127 times, that is 5,127 prototypes before he found the one that worked. That's quite a number, isn't it? 5,127. So you can imagine it had to be safe to keep going and keep failing all those times, each time failing a little less, failing a little less. But the vision was so powerful that he was able to eventually break through and create the enormous success that's made him a billionaire, but done very well by his shareholders and so on, and by his customers. I can tell you, we have a Dyson. It's a wonderful vacuum cleaner. But that's an important understanding. The interpersonal domain makes it safe to experiment and learn, which makes the operational domain and the strategic domain much more likely to succeed. Here's my second proposition for you. It's really hard to be good at all aspects of leadership on your own. And that's because these different aspects of leadership often not only make different demands on us, but they sometimes make conflicting demands. So think about the strategic domain. When I'm trying to think strategically, I tend to think away from the detail up to higher levels of generality. I think out into pull in more particular variables and considerations. And when I'm thinking about the future, which the strategic domain is always trying to do, it can happen in discontinuous scenarios that I build. In other words, creative leaps that don't always neatly trace back to the present day. So the strategic domain goes up and out and jumps to the future. The operational domain does the exact opposite. If you ask a natural operational specialist a question, instead of going up and out and jump, what he will do or she will do is they will narrow the focus of the discussion, they will drill down into the detail, and they'll approach the future in small systematic steps. Now, is either of those better, up, out and jump, or in, down and step? No, they're just different. And what's more, you need both. You need people who can do both in your organization. And what I'm telling you is that an awful lot of people who try to do both themselves end up not being very good at either. Let me tell you another little simple fact. I and my colleagues have assessed literally between us thousands of executives from all over the world. We have never found one who is world-class in all aspects of leadership as defined by that primary colors model. There are 7 tasks in that model. We assess them against those 7 tasks. And usually what we find is people who try to be equally good across the board end up being moderate moderately good only across the board. But people who develop a real specialty in let us say, the strategic domain or the operational domain or the interpersonal domain, they are the ones who usually make it to becoming world class. But it's because they've slightly left some of the other domains behind. So one of the other things you could do for yourselves right now is think about those three domains: the strategic domain, the operational domain, and the interpersonal domain. And why don't you just write down for yourself your rank order? Which are you best at? Which feels like home, if you like? Which are you next good at? So that feels like somewhere that you visit frequently. And which are you least good at? Where do you feel a bit more like a stranger? And it's different for people. And people can get to the top of organizations from any one of those three routes. They don't have to be strategists to be at the top of organizations. I'll say more about that in a moment. So that's my second proposition for you. And in fact, I found further evidence for this. Gallup organization is an international organization, and they published in 2008 a book called Strengths-Based Leadership, which was a summary. It included a summary of decades of their research all over the world on leaders and leadership. And what they discovered was this: the best leaders are not well-rounded. The best teams are. That bears repetition. The best leaders are not well-rounded. The best teams are. And effective leaders, therefore, surround themselves with the right people and build on each person's strengths. Collective completeness. This is Deborah Ancona, who is at MIT, and she and her colleagues in the Harvard Business Review of 2007 wrote a very important article called In Praise of the Incomplete Leader, And she said this: rarely will a single person be skilled in all areas, that is, of leadership. That's why it's critical that leaders find others who can offset their limitations and complement their strengths. Those who don't will not only bear the burden of leadership alone, but will find themselves at the helm of an unbalanced ship. And here's a study from 2013 that PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC, did of 700 executives across a variety of industries from all over the world. And they asked people to rate their bosses. They first of all had to say, how good is your boss effectively in the strategic domain? They asked, how good is your boss at devising strategy and purpose? And they also asked, how good is your boss at executing strategy? That is, expertise in the operational domain, which is where the execution of strategy takes place. Here's the table of intercorrelations. So how good is your boss at developing strategy and identity with vision? That's the x-axis, the horizontal axis. And how good is your boss at executing strategy? That's the vertical or y-axis. And you find that people who are thought to be very effective in both of these are only 8% of the 700 executives, bosses that they studied. And that's without adding anything about the interpersonal domain. So it'll be even fewer than 8% who are good in all three domains. And that's why it's important to understand that we've got to begin to focus a little bit on how I'm going to be world-class as a leader and who do I need around me. Now, if you're a very numerate person, you will look at that table and you'll say, wait a minute, most of the data fall on the bottom left to top right diagonal. Doesn't that mean these two are positively correlated? And of course, the answer is yes, but please note that that's because it's not difficult to be poor at both aspects of leadership. That's why there's 35% in the bottom left-hand corner. So fully 1/3 of the population were poor at both aspects of leadership, again, without adding the interpersonal domain. And only 8% were good at these two aspects of leadership. And again, that's without adding the interpersonal domain. So I want to share with you a rather gentle tease, which is don't try to be a duck. There's an Argentinian saying apparently that says, the duck can walk, fly and swim, but none of it very well. If you've ever seen a duck trying to walk, you see it's a slightly awkward gait and so on. This is actually quite comic, but it's a funny way of remembering. Don't try to be equally good across the board, because the chances are you won't make it. What you need is people who are around you who are brilliant in other aspects of leadership. And may I say also this, that outstanding leaders have adopted this philosophy. I was working for a while when I was working at Oxford with the guy called Peter Erskine, who was given the job of leading as chief executive what is now O2, the mobile phone company. At the time, it was called BT Cellnet. It was a part of British Telecom, and it was a terrible mobile phone company. It had poor coverage, incoherent tariffs, there were very few customers, and when it was floated out to be an organization in its own right, all the analysts' predictions were that this was going to fail. But Peter Erskine adopted this philosophy. And what he said was, he knew that his great expertise was in the operational domain. His great mantra was deliver, deliver, deliver. And what he did, therefore, he said, was firstly, appoint a really great strategy director to sit in the next door office. And the other thing he noticed was that his finance director was brilliant with people. So he had the interpersonal domain, the operational domain, and the strategic domain all covered by 3 top leaders. And together they transformed BT Cellnet into O2. And within 4 years, they were the coolest, hippest, young people's mobile phone company. They had an exclusive license to market the iPhone for the first 6 months that the iPhone came to Europe. And within 4 years, they had sold that business to Telefonica of Spain for 27 billion euro. This was an outstanding achievement, but Peter had adopted this philosophy. He's a great operator. I'll put the right people around me. So let me just explain why this is important to get to understand. Over time, we develop strengths and limitations. But we've also brought with us from our childhood and our upbringing certain personal characteristics which are not unchanging or unchangeable, but slow to change. And I'm just going to call those personality for now. But where you develop and learn a strength in the area that your personality helps you, that's what I want to call a natural strength. That will always feel like second nature to you. But there are limitations we have in areas where our personality could help us. For example, it may be that we haven't yet learned some of the skills of planning and organizing, but we are by personality a very naturally conscientious person. Then I want to call that a limitation, but it's also a potential strength. That's one where it would be sensible to invest some development time and to learn to change, to learn. But some of us have spent an awful long time developing strengths in areas where actually we've got an awful lot of hindrances in our personality. I'm not very good at planning and organizing, but I'm reasonably good at devising new ideas. And the problem is that my curiosity, my imagination is constantly interfering with my ability to do planning and organizing, which requires very focused attention. And my mind wanders much more easily than that. So every now and again, if I even try to plan, it's never more than a fragile strength. And usually for me, it's a resistant limitation. That is, I haven't developed it yet. And I haven't got a lot going for me in that area either. So it would be very low yield if I try to develop a strength in that area. So I want to suggest to you that the third proposition in the primary colors approach to leadership is please choose extremely carefully what you're going to invest your development effort in. You can work with your natural strengths. You can work on your potential strengths because you can develop there quite quickly. You will always have to work on your fragile strengths, because like learning a foreign language as an adult, if you don't use it, you will lose it. But in the area of your resistant limitations, and this is planning and organizing for me, it's best to think of a workaround solution. And the workaround solution I want to propose to you is my fourth proposition, and that's what I want to call working with people whose differences are complementary to yours. So working with complementary contributions. And I do this in the area of planning and organizing. I put people on my team whose natural strengths are in the area of my resistant limitations. So I put planners around me. And these are people that I've had to learn to work with, even though at the beginning, it was very awkward and uncomfortable because they kept asking me the detailed questions that I couldn't answer, until eventually I learned to delegate to them, putting the plans together, and then just check them out with me just to see if that's going to take us where we need to get to. But you can see that working with complementary contributions is not an ultimately comfortable thing to do, because it means you've got to work with people who are not like you, but they are complementary and different. So those are my 4 propositions on one slide. The primary colors model describes the territory. It's hard to be good at all of it. You have to choose carefully what to develop yourself in. And the best way of doing that is to work with complementary differences, people whose natural strengths are in the area of your resistant limitations. So I'm going to stop sharing at that point and invite your comments and questions. And in this period, will you all please put your cameras on? Because I would love to see your faces, and I'd love to talk to you face to face, if you don't mind doing so. Can you do that?
Okay, David, Prof, sorry, I think I'm going to invite Mr. Wan Ahmad right now to just moderate some questions. I see some questions in the Q&A box. And viewers, if you do have any burning questions on my mind, do please ask Prof. David, because he's excited to, share and tell you his secrets, if you may, sir.
Yeah, hi, Professor David. Thank you so much for tickling our brains, because I thought, what an interesting idea, because I must say, having read a lot of management books, this must be one of the most comprehensive sort of leadership model that I've seen. And like you said, it's very understandable. A lot of models that I've seen tend to be a bit complex and tend to be, like you said, having only a piece of it. So it's wonderful to see. As I have complained to you before, primary colors, probably not my best. Being a colorblind person, probably not the best match for me. But I totally buy into the idea, and the idea of working with people who's better than you. So if I can start with my question, you gave the example of O2. Where what's his name? Peter Erskine was good in operations. I'm just wanting to know about this. Most people who I would classify as leaders would never want to let go of the strategic part. Is that a difficult thing to do for leaders? Because they will always want to be the one that leads, that seem to be coming up with a vision. And suddenly delegating the strategic part to somebody else was, would that be a difficult thing to do for a lot of leaders?
Okay, great question, as I expect from you already. Let me give it an answer in 3 parts, if I may. The first is, no one abandons the strategic domain if they're the chief executive of an organization. You're quite right. But the question is, what is your part in that? If you're naturally an operational thinker, you have a choice. You could insist that you come up with all the strategic insights. Remember, you're naturally an operational thinker. So how good are you going to be at that? Maybe not good enough. In fact, I'm going to argue definitely unlikely to be good enough. So we could try and say, well, okay, you're the boss, you're the ultimate strategist. Brackets, even though you're not very good at it. that's not going to help us as an organization. But the great boss understands a very important distinction, and I want to share it with everybody this morning. My morning, your afternoon. You don't have to become a strategist if you become the chief executive. Indeed, you don't have to become a strategist if you become a senior manager in an organization, but you do have to be a part of what I want to call the strategy conversation. The strategy conversation has a very important creative initial phase. Firstly, trying to make sense of the world around us, trying to come up with a story that makes most sense for us. You think about the classic examples. People always talk about Steve Jobs. What did Steve Jobs do? He looked around him and realized that the world's technologies were converging, and that had an implication for any technology company. Unless we were converging technologies, we would miss the boat. And he looked at people's lives and their lifestyles, and he could see that if technologies really did converge, then it would be sensible to try to come up with a piece of equipment that could do multiple tasks. Yes. The Mac, he started very modestly, and as the technology possibilities advanced, so the products advanced as well. But that story is where he starts. And we all have to understand that story, looking around our organization, making sense of the world around us. Sense making is the thing that Deborah Ancona talks about. We can all be part of that conversation. And the great thing is the world is moving so fast in such unpredictable directions that we need as many good brains as possible trying to make sense of what's happening in the world around us. So the first thing is that chief executive, who may not be a great strategist, can at least notice what's going on in the world around him or her, and can be a part of the conversation that invents the story that has implications for us as an organization. So then the second thing is, what is it that we need to do as a result of this unfolding story? How can we best be a part of that story? No reason you can't have a conversation about that with other people. And then the third thing is, okay, once we've begun to focus on what it is that we need now to do in the light of this unfolding understanding of the world around us, the question quite quickly becomes, what are we therefore going to do, and how are we therefore going to do it? And the moment you get to what specifically, so the operational people begin to perk up their interests, because they're beginning to think, okay, what can we do? Or what do we need to learn to do quickly? And then secondly, how are we going to do it? That's an entirely operational question, but it's all part of what I call the strategy conversation. Do you see what I'm saying? So I'm saying, if you're a chief executive and you know that you're much more likely to be a really good with people or a great operator, put the right people around you to have that conversation with. Don't duck out of the conversation. Peter Erskine was a very important part of that conversation. And the operator's role in the strategy conversation is all about feasibility. What can our organization do? What can we learn to do quickly? What are the capabilities that we have that we can put to unusual and different uses? All of those are operational questions, but they're part of the strategy conversation. And if you're naturally interpersonal in your orientation, your part of the strategy conversation is, how are we going to take people with us? What are we going to say to them? How will we persuade? How will we influence? How will we involve? All of those are great interpersonal contributions to the strategy conversation.
Okay, excellent. Professor David, are you still with us? I think the screen has frozen.
We're losing Professor David. Monica, are you there? Is Professor all right? I think there's some connection loss.
I'm here, Nabila, but I'm not in the same building as
I see. Okay. Okay, we'll try to get Professor David. Okay, he's back.
Yeah,
You froze for a while. The screen sort of froze for a while.
Well, it's cold here in England. Yeah.
Okay, maybe we'll take one question from the audience. This is to me, pretty nuanced question. So he asks, from your opinion, does leadership come with experience or maturity?
That's an interesting extension, or maturity. Okay, let me give you the hard answer and then soften it slightly. It doesn't necessarily come from either, because there are also some skills to learn, and leadership comes with a number of things which are much closer aligned to, it'll sound like experience, but there's an important contribution that maturity makes to the approach to leadership that I'm advocating. I'll be less cryptic. Leadership can be learned. Remember, what I'm saying is, don't spend your time trying to be good at all of it. Try to get really, really good at those aspects of leadership that you're already somewhere along the road. And the reason I say that is not that you can't learn to be good at any aspect of leadership. I believe you can. The neuroscience is telling us about what's called neuroplasticity, that the brain can change, it can learn remarkably well. What it takes is a great deal of focused attention, a great deal of opportunities to practice, a great deal of feedback, and so on. But what I am saying that is, if you're now reasonably senior, the likelihood of you having the time and resources to devote to learning to become world-class in the areas that you're not very good at already, you'll find it's a very low yield activity. Yeah, it's like mining very thin seams underground. Yes. So the best thing for you to do is to go where your investment of time in learning is likely to give you the fastest and greatest yield, which is likely to be perfecting the things that you're already good at and making pretty good the things that you're moderately good at already. The things that you're least good at are the areas where you'll have the lowest yield for your effort. So it comes from that form of experience, which is called learning. So people can go through, some people say, I've got 30 years experience in this job, and everybody knows the old retort, which is, no, you've got 1 year experience repeated 30 times. In other words, you haven't learned a lot. So don't confuse time spent with learning. So if you can make your experience count, then that will really help. But there's one critical contribution that maturity makes, and it's really important for me to share that with you. I'm talking about shared leadership, distributed leadership. I'm talking about the leadership of complementary differences. In other words, one I need to be able to learn to depend on you for certain aspects of leadership, and you to depend on me for other aspects of leadership. So both of us needs to be able to do that. Now, maturity, I can speak as a psychologist, passes through 4 phases. Little children are highly dependent. I've got 4 little grandchildren, all under 4. They are highly dependent. They would die if people didn't look after them. As they get to become teenagers, they become what's called counter-dependent. That is rebellious. Whatever we want them to do is the last thing in the world they want to do, and they think we're very stupid for asking them to do it. Those of us who've been through the parenting of teenagers know this very well. Eventually, often in young adulthood, we achieve a stage of what's called independence. So we can make our own mind up about things. But I'm talking about the 4th stage of maturity, which is what's called mutual dependency, where you can depend on me and I can depend on you, and that feels good, it feels okay. But the problem with this is that people get stuck in this maturational process. I can tell you that I have assessed senior leaders who are still highly dependent. They often don't make it to the very top end of the organization, but they still get quite a long way up because they're pretty bright, but they're still, when things get tough, they want someone else to take over. There are still rebellious leaders, counter-dependent leaders. There's an awful lot of leaders who are strongly independent, who will not let go of stuff. They believe that they are the best person to come up with all the solutions. The numbers of people who achieve that final stage of maturity of mutual dependency are few and far between, but they're increasingly able to lead well if they latch onto these ideas about leadership and understand that their maturity is part of this. So all of us can get there, but some of us are sort of slightly frozen or hindered and stuck, if you will, in this 4-step sequence. So one of the things we need to be able to do in EduCity, at Henley Business School, wherever we may be, we need to help our clients, our customers, our colleagues to achieve that final stage of maturity and make sure that we show it ourselves.
Just probably a quick follow-on question. Are there people who don't recognize that they're frozen?
Oh, most people don't think they're frozen. I mentioned that 4-step sequence and they all go, yeah, yeah. You know, and they even say things like, you know, there are people here who are frozen, I can see. They're all looking around them, you know.
Except at themselves.
Exactly so, yes.
Okay, maybe we take one more question. So is there, I'm going to extrapolate a little bit. You know, it's a huge question of, you know, what's the biggest secret in becoming a good leader? And the second part, do good leaders produce good employees?
Well, the second part's easy. The answer is yes, in the sense that leaders can make a real difference to the way a culture operates in an organization, and they can change the climate. Culture is what we do, climate is the way it feels in the organization.
Right.
And leadership has to go first. So if I want people to trust me, I better take a risk and trust them first. If I want people to work hard, they better see me working hard. You know, so leaders go first. So yes, good leaders produce at least, shall we say, better employees, provided they're not, you know, psychopaths or something, you know, and therefore irretrievable. But that is either of them, psychopath. But the second, what's the single biggest secret of great leadership? I'd say there are no secrets. It's out. I've tried to write very explicitly about what great leadership comprises. I'd say get educated in leadership. You know, there are organizations like yours and ours that try to help people learn about leadership. Get yourself educated in leadership, get yourself coached, get yourself mentored. But please understand that a little bit of the learning will be a little bit awkward, because if there is one big secret about leadership is I've got to be very honest about my own strengths and limitations first. And that's not always easy. You know, it took me 20 years to come to the realization that I really was very poor at planning and organizing. And you know why it took me so long? It's because I always was convinced it was easy. And what does it say about me if I can't do something that's easy? Does that make me stupid? What I had to learn was that it's a set of skills. My skills are in a different area. Sometimes they conflict with the demands of planning and organizing. And I had to therefore value what I was good at in order to admit what I'm not good at, and not try and kind of whitewash everything. Are you with me?
Okay. Sorry. Structurally, you said you wanted to pause there. Do you want to go to the next part before we address more questions?
I'm happy to. So you said structurally, I don't understand.
Sorry, no, because you said you wanted to pause. Was there another part that you wanted to present?
No. That's what I wanted to say. There's more I could say. You can imagine. Okay. I've got lots to say about leadership. I could talk about leadership in the longer term, and that might be something to add. Let me ask you the question, if I may. The final model I was going to share with you is a model of leadership in the longer term. Would that be useful now, or shall we just mine what's gone on so far?
Okay, maybe let's mind the questions first, because I think that's really
spoken. I think so too.
There's a question by Nur Shamina Aina that asks, how do you find the balance between the three aspects of the primary colors? You know, how is it hard to resolve the conflicts between them, you know, as an organization moves forward?
There are two factors that normally determine how we spend our time in that primary colors model. One is our own skill set. And we have to be careful about that, because it's easy for us to overplay that aspect of leadership that we are most comfortable in and believe ourselves to be best at. Yeah. So it's a bit like saying, you know, if I play golf and I've got a full range of golf clubs, I know that I hit the 6-iron better than any other golf club in the bag. So it's amazing how often I find that I really need to reach for that 6-iron right now, you know, irrespective almost of where the ball is lying. You know, that, in other words, that's my favorite club. That's what I reach for every time. And so we have to be super careful about that, because the thing about the tasks in the primary colors model is that they don't make up for each other. So no amount of creating alignment will make up for not delivering results. Yeah, no amount of setting strategic direction will make up for not building relationships appropriately. Yeah. So if I overplay my hand because it's my favorite contribution as a leader, the chances are I will not serve my organization well at that time. But when I make my contribution when it is the most required right now, then I make the greatest contribution. Yeah. So one factor in choosing between those different leadership tasks and the 3 domains is me, you know, and my favorite domain. I have to keep that in check. Yes. But of course, the other is the situation. So following the golfing analogy again, where is the ball? You know, there's no point my reaching, if my favorite club is the driver, there's no point my reaching for that if the ball is in the sand in a bunker. You know, it won't work. You know, so what I've got to learn to do is to listen, not just to my own intelligence interpreting what's needed right now, but listen to other people as well. So for example, it may be that we're not delivering results right now, and someone who's a real skilled interpersonal observer of what's happening in our organization might say, David, I think the problem is we haven't created alignment. People are not working hard enough. We could try to drive them harder. We could get more draconian, get more severe, use more discipline and try and push them. Good old 19th and 20th century leadership, early part of the 20th century. Or we could say, okay, folks, just pause for a second. Let's get back to why we've got to do this. Let's see if we can get the alignment to be greater. And then that releases an awful lot of commitment in the form of energy to the task. Are you with me? Yep. So it's those 2 things. It's the person and it's the situation. And it's the interaction between the 2 that helps us choose where to focus our leadership attention. And that bit in the middle that I called leading has got those 2 aspects to it. 1, choosing where do we direct our attention to the other leadership tasks, and 2, sustaining people's effort in that when they might be beginning to flag a bit.
Okay. Just probably a follow-on question. Do people or do leaders ever mistake what they're good at? Because that's the starting point, isn't it? If you don't know what you're bad at and what you're good at, you can't really implement it.
Oh yes. I used to. We had nannies when our kids were little. They're now grown up and on their way. But I used to develop this kind of running joke in my mind that I looked like Tom Cruise. And eventually, and I finally heard one of our nannies say to my wife, "Does he really think he looks like Tom Cruise?" Yes, people can be very mistaken about their own capabilities. In fact, one of the things that I think is helpful for all leaders from time to time is to get a dispassionate third-party opinion about their capabilities. And it's hard if you're the chief exec. So you've got to go to someone like me, or someone, you know, someone who's skilled in assessment. And I used to do this a lot, even for chief executives. And I would say, okay, I would take them through a series of psychometrics. I would take them through a 3 to 4 hour semi-autobiographical interview in which I really get under the surface. And then I would write a report for them. And I give them a score out of 5 against each of those leadership tasks in the primary colors model. And we never found one leader anywhere who was a 5 in every aspect of leadership. And it was my job, because it was safe for me, because I'm outside of the organization, to say to the boss, hey, you're quite good at delivering results, but you know what? Your style is quite harsh. So when it comes to creating alignment, you're more likely to use push than pull tactics. And so let me suggest some pull tactics that you might find someone to deploy for you, or begin to try to experiment with yourself. And every now and again, I always would fear that the reaction would be, how dare you? Don't you understand? I'm the boss. But I never got that reaction. If you build the rapport, and I assessed chief execs of major organizations, people who had received their knighthood from the Queen for this, that, and the other, I would assess them, and I would, take a big deep breath and go, well, I think this is the report for you. But the point is that it's always sensible to start. In fact, this principle has become known as the Pendleton Rules. But the Pendleton Rules say, let's start with what they're good at, because that's what they're going to build on. And let's look at the things that they can learn next, because that's something that they can devote their attention to if they want to. But then let's not be shy to be really explicit about the areas where they probably need someone else to work alongside them. And provided they've got a solution, most intelligent leaders think, okay, I can do that. The point is, there is no senior leader, in my experience, who is complete. So I'm not singling you out, for example, to say you're incomplete. Well, so am I, and so is everyone else I've assessed. The question is, what's the area in which you've got a hole?
Yeah.
And let's think of the best way to work with that, or to work around it.
So we're running out of time. I've been I'm flagged. That is the last question. So the question goes, how do you break the stigma that only the leader possesses the ability or the right to make a decision? That's number one. And how do you break that mindset that that the others are not only supposed to follow, but it should be otherwise?
Please understand my love and affection and respect for Asia when I say this, because it will sound as if I'm being critical of Asia in particular. I'm not. You will find businesses all over the world led by people who need to get over themselves. People who believe that they have a monopoly on wisdom. They're often the heads of family businesses. But there are people in other sectors too who have exactly that belief. They're often people who've been around a long time. They believe that their experience is second to none. What we all have to understand is how fast the world is changing. The world is not only changing quickly, but changing unpredictably. And the problem with one person believing that they alone have all the key insights and they alone have the right to make all the key decisions is that an awful lot of the time they're going to be wrong. But the problem is that they'll only discover it too late. And so what I want people increasingly to get comfortable with is the idea, it's a very simple idea, and that is that the more the world gets complex and fast moving and unpredictable, the more we need more brains scanning, thinking, discussing, deciding. So big strategic decisions, I would say, don't make on your own. And if it's small operational decisions, why are you making them at all? We should be focused on the things that only we can do, And those are very few. And so I get people to run a little audit, which is look through a week of your commitments and allocate each thing that you do to one of 5 categories. 1, or A, this is something that only I can do. They will be very few, okay? B, this is something that someone else could do now. C, this is something that someone else could do if I give them the training and development to be able to do it. Yeah. D, this is something that no one really needs to do. And finally, this is something that I have no choice but to do because it's required of me. And sometimes government regulations require that only a certain person can sign a certain document and so on. So that's something I have no choice about. And sometimes if you're in the middle of an organization, my boss insists that I do this. Yeah. But for example, going to a meeting, so often people are there because of what they know, but an awful lot of people in their team know the same things. Why can't they go to the meeting? Yeah. So what I'm trying to get people to do by doing that audit is to locate the things that only they can do and to understand that that's what they should focus their time on. Yeah. Until they can turn those into things that other people can do as well. And the best exponent of this approach I found as a middle manager in a big power company. And he told me that whenever he got a new job, he made it his job to make himself redundant as fast as he possibly could. He started out as a middle manager with that philosophy. He relentlessly developed his team so that quickly, they could do whatever he did in that job. Where did he end up? Redundant? No, chief executive.
Excellent. Actually, I was just about to ask you the exact same point. Should leaders try to make themselves redundant? You know, yes. But if you're at the top and you make yourself redundant, where else do you go?
Well, I'll tell you what normally happens. By that time, you become non-exec directors of other organizations and try to take that gospel elsewhere. But the point is, you know, we are only in our jobs for a while. We are only stewards of that job for a while, even if it's our family business. We're only in it for a while. I live in a house that was built in 1880. I'm sitting in there at the moment. And I'm a steward of this house. I own it. We've paid off the mortgage. I own this house. But I'm going to die. And this house is going to stand. So in the meantime, I've got to look after it. And I've got to hand it on to the next generation, ideally in better shape than I found it. And jobs are just the same.
I think that's an excellent point to end. I think we've reached the end of our session. I think thank you so much to the attendees for your questions. Thank you so much to Professor David Pendleton, who explained things so clearly, even a colorblind person could understand the primary colors model. So we hope to maybe connect to you with you in the future with other programs that we organize. And a big thanks from me, and I'll pass back.
May I give my thanks as well? Thanks
sure,
to everybody for inviting me, but also thanks to those of you who have participated and given me your time today. Thank you. I'm grateful for that. As I say, next time in Malaysia.
Okay, we look forward to seeing you here. Yeah. Okay, back to Deb. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wan Ahmad. Thank you, Professor. I mean, that is actually a great session, wonderful. So before we end the inaugural EduCity Industry Leadership Discourse, I would like to share on our upcoming event happening tomorrow. So tomorrow, for viewers, for those especially in Johor Bahru, in Johor even, Xperia 2021 is back to offer content that will benefit the youth and the community at large. Team Build Back Better, Xperia 2021 will be organized from 3rd December to 5th December 2021. Starts tomorrow with the content pillar of educational exhibitions, sports, entrepreneurial, and family entertainment. Free access to all. The main attraction under exhibition is an education fair featuring established higher education institutions in Johor, which will run simultaneously with a career fair. Other than that, we have Kids Corner, we have Food Festival by Makan Space, Sports Clinic, and special for you who will be joining us starting from tomorrow, a hot air balloon ride. So all are happening from 3rd to 5th December. Bring your family, bring your friends, adhere to the SOP, and do enjoy EduCity and Iskandar Putri in our biggest event of the year. Participants, viewers, stay tuned for our upcoming programs and do follow us on our social media at EduCity Official for YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, for any updates. Please turn on your notification for upcoming events and also webinars, not only by EduC Academy, but from the whole EduCity group. Till then, take care, stay safe, and we will see you in the next series. Thank you, Encik Wan. Thank you, Professor David. We'll see you all. Goodbye.
Bye.